I turn my attention and recognize now the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Foster, who's also the chair of the Task Force on Artificial Intelligence. He's recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and to our witnesses. And I guess first I'd like to start by thanking our financial regulators in the U.S. For the remarkable fact that in the 12 years since we passed Dodd-Frank, we have not had a financial crisis. It was not always thus, and I think enhanced capital requirements are a very important part of that. Now, Vice Chair Barr, as you undertake your holistic review of the capital requirements, I would like you to reconsider and consider recent international experience with contingent capital instruments. You know, one of the significant authorities that you were provided by Dodd-Frank, but which FSOC has not so far used, is to require systemically important financial institution to issue contingent capital instruments as part of their capital. This, to my mind, has several major advantages. First, it prevents contagion by providing an automatic pre-negotiated recapitalization of a bank that gets in trouble without putting the DIF or ultimately the federal taxpayer on the hook for bailing out giant bank failures. Secondly, it provides a market-based incentive for bond traders to look deeply into the books and the risk posture of giant banks, providing an early warning signal for banks before they get into trouble and encouraging them to raise capital while they still can. There was a very good, at the time of the crisis, I think it was Strongen's group inside Goldman Sachs, did a very interesting counterfactual analysis of how much better the crisis would have been if banks had been required to hold contingent capital instruments. And I think that analysis is still relevant. Thirdly, they provide a market-based incentive for giant banks to adopt a less risky posture simply in order to get the best possible price for its contingent convertible bonds. And so, you know, the combined effect of all of these things, I think, will get us hopefully more near the being able to address the failure of the Mogliani-Miller theorem, which I will not ask you about as it applies to giant banks. But as I mentioned, the U.S. regulators have not so far used this authority, but other regulators have, with, I believe, very positive results. At first, the risk premium for COCO bonds, which is not large, that was one of the big worries about it. It hasn't happened. Secondly, the bond markets have provided useful early warning signals, for example, for the slow motion agony of Deutsche Bank or the more rapid ongoing dismemberment of Credit Suisse. And all of this occurred without a whiff of contagion. So to my mind, they worked pretty much as people hoped. And so my question for you is, what is your view of contingent capital requirements, and will you take a new look at them as part of your holistic review?
Thank you very much, as always, for your thoughtful question. I think that, if you take a step back and think about the different types of these instruments, we do have a form of these instruments in the current framework with respect to what people call gone concern capital. That is, in the event of a resolution of a globally systemically important bank, there's a long-term debt requirement at the GSIB level, at the holding company level, that is in effect converted into equity in the new institution when a bridge bank is created in resolution.
But I don't believe that doesn't really provide a useful market signal when a bank starts to be within sight of getting in trouble.
Right. It doesn't perform the same exact function as going concern arrangement people think of in terms of COCOs. There is some risk with COCOs that, as you get close to those buffers, you might see runs. It might accelerate runs or contagion. And so I think it's appropriate to be cautious about that. And so in my own view, I prefer the gone concern form of this instrument because it's only triggered on resolution, and therefore it doesn't have that kind of potential for contagion, but it still performs the loss absorbing function, which is the other aspect. I believe
there are trigger mechanisms that have been developed that avoid what you're worried about, people gaming the trigger point, stuff like that. So I think there's been a lot of progress on that. And Anyway, so I encourage you, and I will continue to pester you about having a good, a serious look at that, because it is, in the 12 years since we passed Dodd-Frank, a lot has been learned, and they really avoid a lot of certainly the political agony we went through when we had to pass TARP and so on, and the last 12 years of discussion about what appropriate capital requirements are.
I welcome our further conversations.
Thank you.
Gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Davidson, is recognized